Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the Blessed Noble and fully self-awakened one. So greetings to all you revelers in full moon delights. So this is, some of these months lend themselves to certain subjects. So obviously this one is about love. So I I've read it about 5 times over the years, Erich Fromm's classic, The Art of Loving, and some of you might know. Definitely worth a read anyway. And he starts off, but I'm going to turn it into a sort of question. Like when we do something or say something or think something out of love, do we do it in order to love, in order to develop our love, or do we do it to be loved? That's a cheeky one, that, right? So then he talks about why we need this love. And he of course, it's a psychoanalysis thing. And when we're born, you know, for those first few months or so, there's no separation between us and our mothers. And so that's really a halcyon period, a heavenly state to be in. And then, of course, the separation starts, which is needed for the child to become a little independent being. But that separation is a sense of loss. And according to psychoanalysis, that's what produces our loneliness in life, because we want to get back to that wonderful place we were when we were babies. From the Buddha's point of view, from the Dharma's point of view, rather, of course, it's more to do with the essential relationship that we make with this psychophysical organism that we call the self. And the self knows that it is unstable. It comes to know that it's not secure. So the fundamental position from a Dharma point of view is this feeling of unsafety. And because of that, we start collecting things. And that's the first thing that the Buddha talks about. It's translated as greed, but it's much better to see it as acquisitiveness. So we acquire things, and there are 4 major areas where we do that, of course. Rich, want to be rich, like loads of money, like Scrooge. And the more I have, the safer I feel. If I've got £1 million in the bank, I feel really safe. And then there's power, control over our lives, control over people, makes us feel safe, we're in charge. So that's also can be a real pain. And then there's pleasure, of course, seeking just people who just want one experience after the other, been there, got the T-shirt, all that sort of stuff. Foodies, who live for the next exciting diet or menu, rather. And then finally, there's those who seek to be appreciated, seek to be praised, and that's usually we're seeking some sort of fame, okay? So here we're dealing with fame or the desire to be loved, yeah? Now, that would be, of course, also a cause of loneliness, yeah? The fact that when we feel lonely, then we have these little words going on in our heads about how useless we are and horrible. And what we do, we tend to reinforce that by forming friendships, by so we say, padding out our friendships by making sure that they are, stable friendships. We don't want to lose them, because then we'd feel really lonely. But that, unfortunately, is a bad strategy, because what it does is it makes us dependent on them. And what it means is that when we have our self-worth or self-esteem is dependent on what other people think about us or what they say about us, how they treat us. And therefore, sometimes you feel pretty rotten if you do that. And of course, people whom you love disappear. They either leave you or they get fed up with you, and some of them die. So, so nothing is to be taken for granted. So there's always that little sense of anxiety of loss. Yeah, anything you become attached to is going to create some anxiety of loss. And the other thing we do, of course, is to seek distraction. And I'll come to that in a minute. So the best strategy is actually to love, right? To come from a position of love. So when you come from a position of love, you immediately fill yourself with good feelings about yourself. And that sense of self-worth, self-esteem comes naturally when we behave from a position of love. And all the other positions, social virtues of compassion, joy, etc. So how do we purify our love? First of all, is to recognize that this thing about the self and it's feeling lonely and it's needed and it's neediness, that has to be recognized, so that when we are doing something, we've got to see these little background voices. In the Buddhist teaching, they're known as latent tendencies, the anusaya, the latent tendencies. So they're always there, ready to be fired. And in psychology, they'd call it sort of subconscious motivations. So that's where we get the idea of Freudian slips. See, something's happening in the back of the mind, we're not recognizing it, and it comes out in a slip that makes us feel embarrassed. So when we're about to do something or say something or even think something, you've always got to be aware of this little other dialogue that's going on. So it might be, for instance, well, I'm going to do your garden, and I hope the background little voice is saying, and you'll come and do mine when I need it. Or I know you'll really love me after this. You'll really appreciate my friendship. So there's always these little things going on in the background. And it's a case really of making those conscious. Now, as soon as they become conscious, they lose power over you, right? So if you remember, after the Buddha was fully liberated, there was 7 years, it said, that Mara chased him with his 3 daughters. So sensual desire, sexual desire, and if you don't know the third one, I'll leave you to guess it. And after 7 years, he sort of began to go away, you see, and he sort of said, what's happening? He says, well, the Buddha sees me. He sees me. He says, well, give us a bit more time. You see, he says, no, he says, after 7 years, I'm not going to get through. I'm not going to get through to the Buddha. So as soon as we see these little conversations coming from the self, the neediness of the self, the wanting to be loved, they don't have power over us. And we then reestablish our commitment to doing something from the heart of love. And that's how we begin to purify our hearts. Now, the purification of the heart demands a lessening of the self. So therefore, itself is a path of love, is a path of liberation, rather, excuse me. The path of purification is itself a path of liberation. Normally, of course, we put the accent on insight, on seeing things, which is absolutely necessary as well. But with the path of love, this is the process. You're constantly purifying your intentions, coming from the heart. And it's funny, there's always an effort in philosophy to give you reasons. There's not time to go into the way that philosophers think about ethical behavior, love, compassion, and joy, and all that. They try to give us rational reasons, but the great Scottish philosopher Hume, and I've heard him called the philosopher's philosopher, says that whenever he looked into an act of goodwill, always he didn't find a reason at the bottom of it. What he found was a sentiment, and that's his word for something that arises out of the heart. And Confucius said that the ground of a harmonious society was benevolence and concern, love and compassion. So everything around love always begins in the heart. Now, the only problem is that it's not always a feeling. You don't have to feel loving in order to act from a position of goodwill. So, for instance, a surgeon who's operating, I doubt if they feel some great big gushing love towards their patient. I mean, their attention is on what they're doing. They should be equanimous, calm, cool, right? Again, when we say the heart, we're really talking about attitude. We're not talking about feeling. The feeling is sometimes there and it sometimes isn't. That's important. Okay, so that gives us some idea as to how to make our acts of love, the way we speak and the way we think, coming from the heart of love, more and more pure. But let's just say just a word about loneliness. Now, when we feel lonely, it's a bit of a downer for the self, because the language is something like, nobody loves me who could love me. I mean, I'm horrible. And all that sort of really, really upsetting talk. So we try to escape that. As soon as you feel lonely, as soon as it actually just drips into consciousness, off we go. We turn on the TV, get onto social media, open a new packet of biscuits, anything but feel the loneliness. And that's, of course, why we don't like to tell people we feel lonely, because what we're saying to them is that we're not loved, we're not appreciated. So it's a difficult one for us. Now, if by trying to escape it, of course, it still remains there as one of these anusaya, as one of these latent tendencies. And what it's going to do is going to make you overact your love to other people so that you can prove that you are appreciated, right? You're going to be overly joyous at people's success, just so they know that you are joyous and that you are to be praised because of that, and that appreciated and loved. So you've got to tackle the loneliness in its rawness, okay? And this is what Vipassana teaches us. So we go into the mental state, the feel of it, and you have to have the patience, you have to be open to it. And it helps to have a sense of care towards it, a sense of, wanting to heal the heart of it. And that gives you a right attitude towards the feeling of loneliness. But you still have to go in there, you have to sink into it and feel the raw feelings. And of course, what you're doing is you're opening up to your heart. The heart wants to speak to you. It speaks in feelings, in mental states. And in so doing, what you're doing is we're letting off that steam. We're allowing that turbulence to manifest as turbulence, as energy. And therefore, it's exhausting itself, just like anything else. If you go for a run, at the end of it, you feel exhausted. So if you give the heart a run, it'll feel exhausted. And now the really important thing is, if you can, see, this is the really important thing. If you can, to stay to the very last sensation caused by that loneliness, right? Because if you stay there, you might see the transformation. And that energy is never lost. It always transforms towards its opposite. And what you may experience is a sense of wonderful relief and peacefulness. But also, to your great surprise, it might burst out into this universal love for all beings. It's quite remarkable what will happen if you stay to the end. You don't have to stay to the end for this technique to allow the heart to purify itself. But if you do, it gives you real confidence, because now you know that all these negative mental states are always moving towards the opposites. No energy is lost. And of course, that doesn't mean to say that when they are their opposites, when you do feel love, these mental states can be developed indefinitely. Okay. So in other words, after this year of real commitment, you should be constantly sailing in a piece of joyous love. No doubt about it. Unfortunately, this universal love that we're trying to get to, this sort of a love which is above any love to do with attachments, is something we have to develop. All these other loves, if you think about it, come naturally. You know, I mean, there's a natural loving of parents towards their children. You don't organize yourself. You don't sort of set yourself up to fall in love. You just fall in love. But, you know, you meet somebody and you like them, and before you know it, you fall in love, or you developed a friendship because of that sort of connection between two hearts. All these types of love are just part of our natural human nature, but to lift it into this universal love, this metta, takes effort. You've got to lift yourself out of that stuff and really make an effort to open up your heart to all beings in all directions. So that's really the final thing. So the question then is, to love or to be loved, right? Never mind Shakespeare and Hamlet. That's the question. To love or to be loved in terms of our daily activity, in terms of our spiritual practice. And if we keep an eye on these anusaya, these latent tendencies, we'll get a hang of it, you see. It means that you've got to have a slightly more spacious awareness, an awareness which is not only a mindfulness, not only about what's out there, but a constant sort of inner awareness. Like you know all the time how you're feeling. It's just there in the sort of background. And when something moves, an irritation or something like that, you become aware of it. And because you're aware of it, it no longer has control over you. And you can just either park it, so you're not pushing it away with fear or with aversion. So those are suppressive measures. You're just putting it to the side and re-establishing your attitude, your act of will. Okay. I think that's it. I think I've done it. So I can only hope my words have been of some assistance, that by your severe practice of goodwill and concern, you will be liberated from all sufferings sooner rather than later.